adapted from an Appalachian collection, localized and condensed to 19 Colorado accounts for this edition. The lake at dusk looked like a wound in the earth, black water rimmed by spruce, a thin line of mist licking the boards of a public dock. The air smelled of wet pine and cold metal. The last light clung to the ridgeline and then folded away. It was the sort of place people went to get small and quiet, to let a fire die down and believe the world was as it should be. That night, someone decided to come closer. These are 19 true Colorado horror stories, small, sharp incidents told by the people who lived them. Each account centers on a single unsettling detail. A Polaroid slipped beneath a door, a lens tucked into a curtain seam, footprints that stopped at the waterline. Where a crime was alleged, it is presented as the witness reported it. Where evidence was produced, it is described as the witness produced it. Some of these moments ended in calls logged with a sheriff or a county ranger. Many ended in private decisions. Locks changed, houses sold, routines altered. Others remain unresolved, the way a flashlight beam finds a face for a second and then loses it. If you listen for it, the pattern is clear. The watcher leaves a trace. Sometimes it is meant to be proof that someone was there. Sometimes it is an offering, a signature. Sometimes it is nothing more than a mistake. Scuffs and photos that could be the work of a prankster. But for the people who found them, these traces were enough to break the ordinary quiet of home. 1. He had spent the day casting lines into an alpine inlet, a pale crescent of water 3,000 feet above the valley floor. When the sun folded behind the mountains, he pitched his tent on the narrow spit of land that jutted between two coves and made a small fire. He'd sleep with the tent flap undone a sliver, like someone who wants to watch the stars while keeping one eye on the world. Around 2 in the morning, he woke to the sound of something tapping, soft, rhythmic, against the canvas. At first he thought it was rain. The tapping came again, then a rustle, a scraping like fingernails along the wooden slats of the dock. He lay very still and listened. The sound didn't belong to any animal. He knew it was patient. When dawn came, he found 4 shallow boot prints in the mud at the water's edge and a Polaroid tucked beneath a rock on the dock. The photo showed his tent in the dim bluish light before dawn. There was a strange blur near the entrance, and the flash had caught a third thing, a pale face turned away toward the trees, so indistinct it might have been a trick of exposure. He carried the Polaroid to the trailhead and handed it to a county ranger. "I don't know what to do with this," he told me later. "I had the picture in my hand, and I felt like someone had been watching my whole sleep." The ranger logged the report. The witness said the ranger walked the shoreline and found the prints, but no person. No arrest was reported. He sold the gear within a month and stopped camping alone. Months later, he still scanned the dark of any lake he passed, checking for reflections that might be anyone else's eyes. 2. A retired teacher owned a small cabin tucked into a stand of aspen on a low ridge. The place had been hers for 15 years. The attic smelled of cedar and old quilts. One autumn morning, she climbed a ladder to retrieve photography equipment and found the insulation disturbed, a narrow path trodden across it. There were tiny drag marks on an upper beam and a Polaroid wedged between 2 joists, showing a corner of her living room. The lamp, the quilt on the sofa, the back of a chair. "I know my house," she said. "I knew the exact angle of the shot. Someone had been up there." The sheriff's office recorded the call. The witness said a deputy came by, looked up into the attic hatch, and noted the disturbed insulation. There was no further forensic detail, no arrest recorded, and no further evidence returned to her. She put a lock on the attic hatch and moved the ladder to the garage. Months later, she admitted she still checked the attic before bed, shining a flashlight along the joists, listening for the whisper of settled dust. The Polaroid stayed in a shoebox under her bed, proof that someone had been inside the private bones of her house. 3. A newlywed couple rented a small log cabin on the western slope for their honeymoon weekend. They'd driven up a thin, white gravelled road and found the place lit with lanterns and smelling of old wood. On their second night, after dinner, they made themselves tea and sat facing the glass of the front window, the world outside a smear of trees. At some point he noticed a smear on the outside of the window, a place where a hand or sleeve had left a pattern of damp. When they stepped outside, they found a single Polaroid tucked beneath the welcome mat. It was a shot taken through the glass, blurred, grainy, of the couple asleep on the sofa. Someone had waited and photographed them without their knowledge. They called the number listed for the property manager and then the county sheriff. The witness said the sheriff logged the report and advised changing locks and checking the rest of the property. There were no signs of forced entry and no conclusive identification of any suspect. They left that night, their quiet vacation ending with a call to relatives and a plea to let someone check the cameras of neighboring properties. Later, the wife told me, I felt like we weren't allowed to have privacy anymore. We couldn't sleep the same way. 4. A woman driving home along a high desert mesa in a ribbon of fog noticed a silhouette ahead, like a lone figure on the ridge, holding something reflective. She slowed, but where she expected a hiker there was only a patch of empty road and an old guardrail. She felt watched for the length of the turn. The next morning she noticed a memory card wedged inside her car's door pocket, an SD card she did not own. When she opened it at home, the card was full of grainy night photos, images of a roadside at different angles, close-ups of license plates, long shots of cars parked in the fog. One frame at the center showed the sedan she drove, and the angle suggested a handheld camera peering through the shrub at the shoulder. She turned the card over to a ranger at the nearest station and filed a report. The ranger logged her evidence and recommended she change routes. I started taking different roads just so I wouldn't be on the same stretch at the same time, she told me. No suspect was identified. She no longer drove late on that pass. The morning after the fourth story, a quiet thought settles in. Objects make the threat real. The Polaroid, the SD card, the footprints, these are small, stubborn proofs that someone else had entered a private moment. They are also a language, a way for whoever is watching to say, I was here. For the people who found them, the decision was immediate and practical. Sell the gear, change the locks, sleep in a different room. For others, it was more complicated. Trust fractured, relationships stressed, jobs rethought. Evidence turned into a claim turned into a choice. If these real Colorado accounts interest you, consider subscribing and checking the playlist of similar survivor stories. There are more witness accounts collected from ridgelines and highway shoulders that put the same question in different voices. What would you do if you found proof that someone had been watching you? 5. A mother rented a roomy cabin for a weekend with friends. After she returned home and unpacked, she found a small black piece of plastic tucked into the seam of a curtain she had removed for washing. It was no larger than a button, and when she examined it closer it glinted, a tiny circular lens. She produced the piece to a deputy at the county station and said she feared someone had used it to watch the living area. The deputy logged the report. The witness said she wired shut the curtains and called the rental company. We didn't find anything else in the cabin, she reported, but the lens, when I touched it, my pulse went high. You can't unknow someone has had that view. The rental company refunded her for the night and offered to have new curtains installed. She slept at a friend's house for a week. That small lens remained, later given to a family friend who kept it in a box along with a written note describing where it had been found. She said she sometimes dreams of a tiny eye reflected in glass. 6. A homeowner in a low, boxy ranch house began hearing sounds in the ceiling at night, shuffling, the scrape of feet. She told a neighbor who said his kids sometimes slept in the attic crawl space. The woman knew this wasn't the case. One morning she climbed into the attic and found bedding tucked between the rafters and a stack of photographs arranged like a small shrine. Pictures of the house from the outside, close-ups of the back door, a picture of the porch light, and, curiously, shots of the inside hallway, all taken from angles that suggested an elevated vantage. She called the sheriff. The deputy who came listed the bedding and photos in the report. The witness said the deputy searched but did not find the person who had been living in the hidden hollow. They'd turned the attic into a camp, she said. There was a sleeping bag, a little pile of canned food, and a notebook, tabs with dates in it. She moved into her sister's apartment for a month and then changed the locks. Her marriage strained under the weight of the intrusion. She spoke of difficulty trusting anyone who climbed a ladder. 7. A group of friends camping near a high country trail returned from a long day and found Polaroids arranged in a ring around their fire pit. Each photo showed a different angle of the campsite. Some showed items that had been left outside to dry, others captured the line of backpacks. On top of the stack sat a single coin, weathered and warm from being left in the sun. They collected the photos and gave them to the ranger station. The witness who brought the case later told me it was like someone had been keeping a record, like we were catalogued. The ranger logged the report and advised relocating the campsite. The friends moved their tents deeper into the trees, but would later say they felt uncleaned of something, the sense that someone had been counting their things and could do so again. One of the friends, who had grown up camping in the region, told the others he suspected a local drifter who liked to keep mementos, someone who was more peculiar than malicious. Another, more shaken, insisted the arrangement had a ritual quality to it. No suspect was identified, no charges pressed. 8. A duplex tenant heard footsteps pacing in the wall between her unit and the next. At first she thought it was plumbing or the weight of the old house settling, but the cadence was too deliberate. The soft thunk of boot on plaster, shifting, then silence. She felt the same rhythm at 3 in the morning and again at 2:30 the next night. In the light of day, she pulled the outlet cover from a hallway to find small screws and a tiny black cylinder lodged behind the drywall. It was a camera, its glass face clouded with dust. She photographed the device, unplugged the power, and carried the camera to the county sheriff's office. The deputy filled out a report. The witness told them she feared she'd been watched while sleeping. She left the unit and moved in with a friend, while the landlord replaced wallboards and professionally checked the wiring. She said the day she reclaimed the apartment, she taped over the outlet and put a new chain on her front door. Her sleep returned in pieces. She still woke some nights convinced she could hear the faintest rasp of a lens adjusting. The pattern becomes harder to ignore. The intruder who keeps tokens. A camera lens tucked into a curtain, a Polaroid left like an autograph, photographs filed in the rafters. In each case, the evidence doesn't always reveal an identity, and often the authorities' job is to record and advise rather than to quickly solve. For those who found the proof, however, the matter required immediate action, physical changes to their lives, and a slow recalibration of safety. In these early stories, the intrusions occurred at the borders of private life, on docks, in attics, on porches. They were invasions defined by small objects and narrow angles. But geography matters, and Colorado's topography affords different hiding places and sightlines. The mountains give you views, but also offer places to disappear. Dark gullies, wallows of sage, the deep shadow under a juniper. A truck can vanish in the bend of a highway and reappear behind you. The next accounts step away from homes and into places where the road itself becomes a stage. There was no single profile for the people who watched. Some survivors suggested opportunistic trespassers, drifters who like to collect the story of a place. Others sensed something more deliberate, someone who left patterns and signatures to be found later. Sometimes the act felt like a ritual, sometimes it felt like a mistake, but the consequences were the same. Evenings no longer felt private. The choice to be alone became loaded, and friends and families found themselves arguing about whether to move or to stay. 9. A hiker set out before dawn for a ridgeline that offers a view descending into a canyon. He was an experienced man, water, map, crampons in the pack. By noon he encountered a figure standing near a cairn, not moving to avoid him, simply facing the drop as if it were a statue. The stranger wore no pack and carried little more than a small camera. When the hiker passed at a respectful distance, the stranger turned, offered no greeting, and walked away along a side trail that vanished into a stand of fir. Later that evening, the hiker found a weather-sealed envelope on the ledge of his campsite. Inside was a single photo taken at dawn showing the hiker himself, his pack, beside the rock, nuanced by the light. He had no memory of being photographed, and if someone had been near enough to take that frame, why had they not been seen? He turned the picture in to the ranger. The ranger logged the report and noted the coordinates where the envelope had been discovered. No suspect was identified. The hiker later told me he began hiking with a partner and would no longer camp alone on exposed ridges. 10. A woman and her boyfriend pulled into a remote county lot to sleep in their car after missing the last turnoff. In the morning, they discovered a small Polaroid tucked under the windshield wiper. The photo showed the car's hood from above, and there was a white line of scuffed paint along the front bumper, matching a new scrape they'd noticed the night before. They called the sheriff to report the property damage and the photograph. The deputy noted the scrape and filed the photo with the incident report. The pair drove away and later sold the vehicle after 3 nights struggling to sleep. The woman said the way the photo had been taken, close, exacting, felt invasive in a way the actual scrape did not. It was as if whoever did it wanted proof that they'd been close enough to touch us, she said. 11. A gas station worker working the graveyard shift said a dark pickup had pulled up late one night and idled too close to the pumps. The attendant noticed through the glass that a figure sat in the truck with a camera poised toward the store's surveillance monitor. When the attendant walked out, the truck drove off, but not before the worker noticed the face of someone inside. The shape of a deer skull dangling from the rearview mirror, a macabre token. The attendant produced a still frame from the station's own surveillance footage and gave it to the county sheriff. The recording included a brief shot of the truck's interior where the skull ornament could be seen. The sheriff logged the report and checked nearby cameras, but reported no arrest. The attendant later said he slept with the shop lights on and changed his evening shift pattern. The skull, he added, was small enough that it might have been a prank. He kept the still as a reminder that symbols were a language in these encounters, trophies, warnings, or a simple attempt to frighten. 12. On a 2-lane state highway that cuts through a shallow pass, a driver reported being boxed in by a large pickup one rain-dark night. The truck pulled up directly behind his sedan and then edged in front, reducing the road to a single open lane. The driver who reported it said the tail of the truck glowed with an odd arrangement of reflective stickers, and that someone in the cab kept pointing a light at his mirrors as if calibrating them. He managed to pull into a wide shoulder when the truck slowed, and when he walked back to check his mirrors, he found a smudged handprint on the passenger window and a scrap of Polaroid rolled into the wiper well. The photo was a close-up of his license plate and the inside of his car's back seat. He called the state patrol. His call was logged and the officer advised him to seek a safe public place and to avoid traveling alone at night on that pass. There was no definitive follow-up to the report. After that night, he told me, he started scheduling trips in daylight and was careful to let someone know his route. For him, the road had become a place where visibility cut both ways. Between the accounts of windows and highways, of Polaroids and lenses, a thread appears. The watcher had an instinct for evidence. They wanted to be seen through their traces. That tendency to leave tokens created a double-edged aftermath for survivors. On one hand, the proof allowed a person to validate their fear, to show a neighbor a Polaroid and say, "Look, someone was here." On the other, it made the violation persistent. A photograph is an object that can be touched and placed on a table and stared at forever. The evidence that proves the act also prolongs it. The sheriff's logs in these rural counties functioned as both reassurance and occasional frustration. Deputies copied down statements, took photographs, and filed reports, but the landscape works in favor of whoever seeks to vanish. Trails split into labyrinths. Culverts swallow sound, and thin phone service renders a call an uncertain lifeline. For many survivors, the system offered what it could: documentation, patrols at odd hours, advice to change routines, none of it guaranteed, but all of it a formal recognition that something had happened. 13. Back in a cabin nestled under a band of lodgepole pine, an old man who'd lived in the same house for 40 years discovered a ring of scratches carved into a front door jamb. Immediately below the set of scratches, someone had left a crude, scythe-shaped etching on a porch post. It looked deliberate, ceremonial in a way that made the old man think of boundary markers. He photographed the marks and handed the images to the deputy, who came to take a statement. The deputy logged the report and remarked that the marks could indicate someone warning others away from the property, either to mark territory or to frighten. The witness, who raised cattle on a nearby plot, admitted he had no strong reason to suspect any local family. Still, he boarded up the porch for a week and asked a neighbor to check on the place. There was no admission of guilt by any neighbor, no arrest. The marks remained. 14. A woman who had grown up along the Front Range said she sometimes left a back door unlocked during the day, trusting the rhythm of small-town life. Over a span of months, she noticed small things going missing: garden shears rearranged, a pair of work gloves placed on the porch in a different spot. One night, she found the door on her back porch propped open just a few inches. Nothing else was missing, but someone had written a single tiny message on the inside of a kitchen cabinet. 2 letters scratched with a fingernail. She photographed the letters, which she said were impossible to translate but felt intentional. She called the sheriff and lodged a report. The deputy catalogued the message and took the photographs, advising the witness to keep doors locked and to install motion-activated lights. She granted that the act could have been the work of a neighbor's adolescent. She also said it felt like more. Whether or not it was malicious, the intrusion altered how she made tea in the mornings. She checked the back door as she climbed the stairs. 15. Across a narrow valley, a neighbor noticed someone taking photographs of her yard through a cheap telephoto from the opposite ridge on more than one occasion. At night, she discovered a Polaroid slid under a potted plant on her stoop. The image was a long shot of her house with a light left on in the window. She turned the photograph over. There was a single penciled date in the corner, the same date she had been home alone. She gave the photo to the sheriff and requested increased patrol checks. The witness said the sheriff logged the report. Patrols were increased for a short period, then returned to normal. She invested in blackout curtains and a friendly neighborhood watch group that began to circle through the area more often. 16. A family owned a modest rental near a state park and found once that someone had slipped a small, weatherproof camera into the eaves of a child's bedroom window. This was the account that required the content warning. Nothing graphic was described, and the family handled the discovery immediately with great care. They found the device by chance when replacing a sagging gutter. The camera had been very small, its lens turned toward the bed. The mother told the ranger the discovery felt like a violation so deep that their house no longer felt like a refuge. The ranger who received the device logged the report and recommended the family contact the sheriff. The witness said the sheriff logged the case, took custody of the camera, and forwarded it to whoever handles digital evidence in that county. No arrest was recorded in the time frame of the report they received back. The family sold the property within months. They sought counseling and spoke about moving to an apartment in town where neighbors were closer and the doors were not set so close to dark shrubbery. There was caution in how they all told this particular story. restraint in language, and insistence on facts rather than speculation. The record shows the device. The record does not show guilt. What the family kept returning to was the emotional aftermath, a persistent low-level fear that crept into daily tasks, the chronic checking of doors and angles, the unshakable feeling of being seen. They emphasized the practical steps they took: reporting, seeking counsel, moving. Those choices were acts of survival as much as responses to the law. After the 16th account, the theme shifts darker. The watchers here had begun to be more visible, their signatures more ritualized. A single token, a deer skull, a cryptic scrape, made a claim over space. For many Colorado survivors, the wilderness was a place of both peace and possible danger. The balance was delicate. The people who had been watched often found the hardest work was not the immediate response, but the slow, ongoing recalibration. They learned to sleep with the radio on, to set travel times to match company, to sell properties they had invested in emotionally and financially. Some stayed and fortified, others left and never returned. Relationships altered. One couple split after a series of prowling incidents, convinced one partner that staying was too risky, and the other that leaving admitted defeat. Not all watchers left physical tokens. In the next sequence of accounts, some survivors found themselves confronted not by objects but by presence. The silhouette on a ridge, a truck that would not pass, the nighttime light trained on a motel window. Those encounters lacked small proofs, and so they lodged differently in memory, as meetings that never fully resolved. But before moving on to the road and ridge stories, consider the role of evidence again. When the watcher's trace was physical, paper, plastic, glass, it created an anchor. People used that anchor to document, to seek advice, to form a plan. A Polaroid or a lens is more than a thing. It insists a narrative exist. Without it, the encounter is harder to categorize and easier for others to dismiss. With it, the witness gains validation and a new burden to decide how to live with the proof. Soon the accounts would turn from the quiet invasions of attics and cabins to encounters that took place in motion, on highways, on ridgelines, and in the pale light of service stations, where the road itself seemed to conspire with whatever or whoever was watching. But for those who found the token at home, the house had already been rewritten. The scratches in a door jamb, the lens in a curtain seam, the Polaroid in a boot. Each became proof that privacy is not an absolute, and survival is often a sequence of practical, sometimes painful decisions. For many people, the hardest work began after the immediate danger had passed. Not the calling of a deputy or the removal of a camera, those are discreet acts with receipts, but the slow, everyday negotiations that follow. A mattress moved to another room, a route swapped with a friend. A home sold at a loss because every shadow suggested a seam you could not afford to trust. Survivors told me the practical choices were forms of self-preservation. Alarms installed, porches lit, curtains upgraded, schedules shared with relatives. But they were also moral decisions. How to weigh fear against the life you wanted. How to recalibrate trust without becoming a person you did not recognize. The thing that broke wasn't a door, one witness said. It was the ordinary permission to be careless, your coffee on the porch, a towel hung out to dry. You start policing your own life. Another put it more quietly. You don't feel safe in the world the same way. Even a bright afternoon feels like something to be guarded against. Counseling, neighbor checks, and community watch groups were common. So were practical, immediate solutions. Dash cams on vehicles, motion-activated lights, window film, new deadbolts. Many survivors described a period of hypervigilance where every bump in a wall or flicker in an outdoor light triggered a cascade of memories. For some, that vigilance eased with time and action. For others, the sound of boots on a porch or the flash of a camera was a trauma trigger that never fully stopped. Relationships strained. In several accounts, a partner wanted to stay and fortify, the other wanted to leave. Financial realities complicated those choices. Many were attached to homes inherited or bought with years of thrift. But trauma has a way of turning decisions that felt purely practical into moral confrontations. "I thought I'd tough it out," one man told me. "Then I woke up and my wife had packed a bag while I slept. She couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't blame her." There was also a quieter communal reckoning. Long-time residents who had once joked about drifters or pranksters learned to listen differently when a Polaroid was placed on a neighbor's stoop. Local coffee roasters and feed stores hosted conversations about safety. A volunteer group started walking trails in pairs. At the same time, many survivors noted that the institutional response, deputies, rangers, patrols, was uneven. Some reports led to additional checks and a visible presence for a time. Other reports were logged and then archived. The case a file that created the official thread, but not necessarily a solution. What held people together repeatedly was testimony. The Polaroid becomes a story you can show someone else. The lens becomes an object that proves an intruder existed. These physical tokens allowed survivors to build a narrative that family, friends, or law enforcement could accept. But that material proof also tethered the violation to a thing you had to look at sometimes to remember what had happened. The object that validated the fear also made it persistent. 17. A man driving late on a mountain corridor near a popular pass said he'd been followed for nearly an hour. He'd left a small town with a load of supplies and was driving through a stretch where the highway narrows and the lights thin. He noticed a pickup in his rear view that stayed at a fixed distance, then closed in, and then pulled to his left, so the road between them narrowed to a lane and a half. He slowed, heart quick, and the truck slowed back, matching his pace. When a turnout finally opened, he edged off, and the truck mirrored him, pulling in behind so close he could not open his driver's door without risking contact. He stepped out to check and saw, across the bed of the truck, the silhouette of a head turned toward him. Someone with gloved hands pressed briefly to the truck's hood, as if to steady themselves. The witness said he noticed 3 handprints in the condensation on the back glass of the pickup, oddly ordered as if placed to form a symbol. He found, wedged under his windshield wiper when he returned to the car, a Polaroid pressed into the rubber, the photo taken from a low angle showing the driver's side mirror and the side of his face. Someone had been close enough to photograph his profile as he sat in his car. He called the county dispatch, and the dispatcher told him an officer would log the complaint. The officer logged the report and advised him to avoid driving alone on that stretch at night and to report any suspicious vehicles immediately. No arrest was reported. After that night, he adjusted his habits. He started using the interstate even though it added miles. He arranged for colleagues to meet him at exits. He bought a dash cam that recorded inside and out. He told me it wasn't the potential for collision that scared him most, but the intimacy of being boxed in. That feeling of being made small and visible at once. 18. 2 friends who liked to watch for raptors on a late summer evening drove up a narrow forest road to a ridge that looks over a valley of aspen and sage. They cooked a simple meal at the pullout and sat with a thermos, watching light slide across the distant peaks. At dusk, a silhouette appeared along the far shoulder of the ridge opposite them, a figure standing very still, backlit by the last sun, holding something that reflected the light. They watched it for a long time, more out of curiosity than dread. When it turned and raised whatever it held, the reflection flashed like a camera. The 2 laughed nervously and said hello. The figure did not answer and then simply melted back along a trail toward a stand of tall pines, leaving the line of the ridge unchanged, but for the memory of a person who had stood there counting the cars below. In the morning they found, propped against a flat rock where they'd set their thermos, a small envelope. Inside was a photo taken from the ridge, an image that included them at the pullout, their parked truck just visible, their plates blurred at the margins. Written on the back, in a hand the witnesses described as hurried. "Saw you. Good night." They turned the photograph over to a Forest Service ranger who logged the report and who expressed concern about the practice of photographing people without consent. The ranger suggested that if they planned to continue watching raptors, it might be safer to spread the word among friends and avoid late solo trips to exposed ridgelines. The anecdote left them unsettled. "It felt like a small communication," one of them said, "not violent but intimate in the worst way, like someone marking us as part of their map." They began to carpool to similar spots and to photograph their own trips on purpose, leaving a paper trail that would show they had been together. 19. For the last account, several witnesses pointed me to a piece of surveillance that had circulated among small town groups. A clip taken from the exterior camera of a rustic lodge frequented by fishermen and weekenders on the western slope. The lodge's camera had been mounted to monitor the entry and the small parking area at night. One autumn, after a string of calls about suspicious vehicles and odd tokens left on porches, the lodge owner reviewed footage in hopes of identifying patterns. The clip shows slow, ordinary frames, wind in the spruce, a headlight sweeping the lot, a pickup turning off the main road. Then, in the space between headlights, a person appears near the edge of the parking lot. They are small in the frame, moving with an odd carefulness. At one point, they lift something that glints in the camera's night sensor. A small, bone-like object. The figure's head tilts in a way that looks deliberate. For a beat, they stand within the camera's cone and then place the object on a post near the door. They move back into shadow. What made the clip so disturbing was what the camera then showed when the lodge's own floodlight swept the post. There, affixed to the weathered stake, was an object that read like a totem. A small animal skull, its antlers or nubs visible in the silhouette. The lodge owner paused the footage, zoomed in, and copied a still. He took the still to the county sheriff's office and reported the incident. The sheriff logged the report. The lodge owner told me he didn't want to sensationalize the image. He described the object as a small trophy-like ornament. "I don't know if it was meant to threaten anyone," he said, "but when I watched it in slow motion it felt deliberate, like someone leaving a calling card." The footage continued to circulate. A few patrons said they recognized the silhouette, tall, deliberate in movement, while others argued it could have been a prank. The sheriff's office ran the standard checks, increased evening patrols for a time, a review of other calls in the area, and outreach to nearby properties. No arrest was made in the weeks that followed. Some regulars quit coming at night. Others tightened the security around their cabins and added more visible lights. Taken together, the three final accounts pull several threads taut. They highlight the ways a watcher can exert control without ever making contact. By narrowing escape routes, by standing on a ridge and recording, by leaving an object that claims a space. These actions are small and precise. They are designed for psychological effect. In rural and semi-wild country, where society's infrastructure thins, those small acts are amplified by the geography. A pickup that follows you becomes an instrument. A shadow on a ridge becomes an accusation. A skull on a post becomes an emblem you cannot easily ignore. After the 19th account, patterns remain stubbornly mixed. Some watchers fit a profile, drifters who collect mementos, prankish loners who like to leave a mark. Others appear organized in ritual, or at least deliberate. They stage moments to be discovered, as if the discovery itself were part of the message. In almost every account, the survivor's life changed in small but cumulative ways. Different roads taken, different sleeping patterns, new locks, different vacations planned. The decision to stay and fortify or to leave entirely was rarely easy and rarely purely practical. There is a kind of echo in these stories, an afterimage that follows the witnesses for years. For some, it is the fear of repetition. For others, it is the nagging thought that the person who watched might return to repeat the ritual. But among the echoes, there's also a current of resilience. People report back months and years later with small victories. a trail group that now hikes in daylight, a cabin that now has a neighbor who checks on the place, a community meeting that begins a neighborhood watch. Survival in these terms is not only avoidance. It is the construction of routines that allow a life to continue despite having once been violated. What do the watchers want? It's a question that never had a single answer. In the retellings, there is evidence for several motives. Some acts seemed opportunistic. An SD card slipped into a pocket at a gas station because the chance was there. Other acts bore signatures, the deliberate placement of tokens, the small shrine in an attic, a Polaroid with a date penciled on the back. Those gestures read like language, and language implies intention and an audience. Law enforcement, where it appears in these accounts, played a procedural role. Deputies logged reports, recorded photographs, and offered practical advice. Rangers walked shores and catalogued footprints. For many survivors, the act of filing a report held value beyond any expectation of arrest. It was a formal witness statement that made their experience legible to institutions and to friends and family. At times, the response was rapid and caring. At times, it felt cursory. That unevenness is part of the landscape these communities inhabit. Distance, thin staffing, and the sheer difficulty of finding a small person who wants to vanish in a vast and wooded place all compound the challenge of investigation. Still, the practice of documentation matters. A Polaroid shown to a neighbor can mobilize a patrol. An SD card handed to a ranger can trigger a camera sweep of the area. The physical proof, for all its psychic burden, is a tool that survivors used repeatedly to change outcomes, rarely to make things legal in the sense of prosecution, but often to generate immediate safety checks and to catalyze community awareness. If there is a single lesson threaded through these 19 accounts, it is that survival is a series of decisions strung together rather than a single heroic act. Report what you can. Create routines that reduce risk. Share your observations with neighbors. Accept that sometimes leaving is necessary, and that leaving is not a failure, but a valid form of self-preservation. Equally, staying and fortifying a place is also a valid choice if it is made with information, community support, and awareness. Some survivors found that telling the story itself had a healing quality. The act of describing the small things, the scent of wet pine on an evening walk, the weight of a Polaroid in one's palm, the noise of a truck pulling close, allowed friends and strangers alike to sit with the experience and offer concrete help. Lights, cameras, a call to a patrol. Others said they felt exhausted by retelling, as if each recounting fixed the moment more solidly into their life. There is no easy closure in many of these reports, no tidy ending where a suspect is identified and justice is satisfied. In their stead are incremental changes, a fence, a new bolt, a neighborhood watch, a sold house. These are the real acts of survival in rural and semi-wild places where the earth itself permits disappearance. They are at once practical and existential. We close where we began, with the image of the lake at dusk. The black water rimmed by spruce, the thin mist licking the boards of a dock. The same geography that gives a place solitude also gives it hiding spaces. The mountains and mesas and ridgelines are both refuge and exposure. For people who have been watched, the landscape reacquires edges, lines to be respected, paths to be avoided at night. For communities, the accumulation of small testimonies changes how people move through the world. Lights are left on more often. Cameras are aimed at doorways. People check on one another. If one of these stories stuck with you, tell us which in the comments below. Share the playlist with someone who needs to hear these accounts, and consider subscribing for more regional survivor testimonies. Your attention helps these stories circulate in a way that can make a difference. Neighbors who read one another's reports are likelier to act. When the last light goes, a beam from a flashlight will still slide across the trees. You cannot know who, if anyone, is watching from the dark, but you can choose small, repeatable acts that make a life livable again. Lock the door. Change the route. Walk with a friend. Tell someone what you found. Those choices are the quiet work of surviving. Night closes on the ridge. Somewhere beneath the stars, a Polaroid waits in a shoebox. A lens sits in a tin. A camera lies sealed in a drawer. The objects are evidence and memory and warning. And the people who carried them forward did one thing in common. They turned fear into action. That is how you keep going. That is how you survive.